I am beyond thrilled to announce that doors will soon be opening to the Wholesome Fertility Method online program. If you've been listening to this podcast, you know that I love to infuse meaning and spirituality into my practice, and I'm so excited to be sharing this program that I have put my heart and soul into. I have left no stone unturned with the creation of this program. This course includes everything that I provide for my patients, including how to understand your charts from a Chinese medicine perspective, detox recipes and protocols, simple and easy ways to go clean on products and cosmetics, research-backed nutrition that has been shown to improve fertility health, fertility-boosting supplements and herbs, breathing exercises, bonus fertility yoga videos, techniques to awaken your innate power to heal yourself, and what answering your sacred call really means. My deepest intention with this program is to empower and inspire you to align with your highest self. I will be offering both independent study as well as added coaching, which has limited spots available. If you're interested in getting on the waitlist, then don't wait. Visit www.thewholesomefertilitymethod.com now, as doors will only be open for a limited time. You will not want to miss it. Episode number 55 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. My guest today is Lindsay Meisel. Lindsay is the Chief Science Editor at Ava Fertility Tracker. She's an expert at breaking down science, technology, and health as it relates to women's health and their menstrual cycle. With over a decade of experienced education and writing about reproductive health, Lindsay is a sought-after speaker and presenter. Her work has been featured on the Fertility Hour, the Birth Hour, the Breakthrough Journal, and the Rumpus. So welcome to the podcast, Lindsay.
Thank you so much for having me.
So can you share a bit about your background and how it led you to women's health?
Yeah, so my background, I'm a writer. I started out as a journalist. I've written about science and technology. I also spent a number of years working in startups in the Bay Area before coming to Ava. But it was really my personal background that led me to want to work in women's health. I was a marathon runner for a number of years, and I didn't get my period. And I learned eventually that this is due to something called hypothalamic amenorrhea. And learning about that and recovering from it made me, for lack of a better word, obsessed with the menstrual cycle and everything about it. And that's kind of what led me to Ava, where I've learned even more about the menstrual cycle.
Oh, interesting. So you got into it obviously because it was personal and you just started reading about it and you were writing. And then so as you were looking into it, you found Ava?
It kind of was, I wasn't looking for Ava. It was just something that I was sort of interested in my life on the side. And then Ava approached me, and it was a good marriage of our unique need, both of our needs, Ava's and mine at the time. And so once I joined Ava, I got Ava World, our content platform, our educational platform, up and running. And that's kind of where I blog about, every single topic that is relevant to a woman who's interested in her menstrual cycle or fertility or trying to conceive, trying not to conceive. And I, interview experts there and look at all of the relevant research studies, and it's just reliable, trustworthy scientific information about fertility and the menstrual cycle.
Awesome. What kind of things do you research, or what are the ranges of types of topics that you address?
That's a really good question, because research is so important to us at Ava. I think probably one of the main ideas, which is why we exist, is that there's a gender data gap. There's not enough research when it comes to women's health, and there's a lot of topics that we simply don't know enough about. I think really big ones are there needs to be more research into the luteal phase and progesterone, into what causes preterm labor, lots of topics like this. And that so To answer that question, there's kind of two different categories of research that I want to talk about. One is that the articles that I publish on Ava World, which are all backed by the research that's available on women's health, and then another is the research that Ava as a company does itself. So we publish our own research studies. We have a research team in Zurich, and we partner with universities there. And we recently published this year a study that looked at what physiological parameters change throughout a woman's menstrual cycle. For probably most listeners of this podcast, they're already familiar with how temperature changes. I think it's relatively common knowledge in the world of women trying to get pregnant that temperature is correlated with progesterone levels. And so after you ovulate, your progesterone increases and your temperature also increases. They follow kind of the same pattern. What's less known is that other measurable physiological parameters change in similarly drastic ways throughout your menstrual cycle. And some of them are much more useful for trying to get pregnant because they change not after ovulation, but before, when you're still fertile for that cycle. And so we published research on how a number of parameters that Ava measures, including resting pulse rate, breathing rate, perfusion, and other things, change and can be used with our machine learning algorithm to determine when a woman is fertile in real time.
I had a question actually myself. This is something that I don't think is out there, but it's interesting to me because I always was wondering if oxytocin has a role in fertility, because we know that it has a role in giving birth. We know that it has a role with bonding and babies and nipple stimulation. However, it does increase, and it has a role, we know, in intercourse. And there is a peak around ovulation, and there's not a lot of research done on that. And I'm curious to see if it has a role in actual conception or if you've heard anything about it.
That's such a good question. I feel like I've heard most things that are if there's a topic on fertility, I've probably heard of it. And I actually haven't heard anything about the role that oxytocin could play. And it's probably just one of those things where maybe there's just not enough research on it. And so it would be great if someone did that research.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so I posed the question to a reproductive endocrinologist on our ABORM group, which is American Board of Oriental Reproductive Medicine. And he said it doesn't seem like they're putting a lot of research on that as well. But in Chinese medicine, there's a heart-uterus connection. And I just feel like that would really be a scientific way of showing that or a Western version of the heart-uterus connection.
Yeah, it would be really interesting. It makes me think about how a lot of women who've been trying for a long time, it really it's hard to enjoy sex when you're when it's like month after month and it's very regimented and rote. And I don't, if they found that enjoying it makes your chances higher, I don't know what people would do with those findings, but who knows what they would find if they haven't even done the research.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just it's just something that really always piques my interest, and I mention it to my patients. I tell them, listen, it gets increased during ovulation, it gets increased during intercourse. There's got to be a reason. It's not the body doesn't just do things just by chance. So, I also mentioned nipple stimulation, whatever they want to do with that information, but it's important to have, to work that aspect of it, because I think that that's the body's way of reproducing. That's the first foundation. And if we skip over that and try to make it mechanical, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice.
It's always nice when there's like small amounts of research that hint at something that you would just want to do anyway, so it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Right. So that's interesting. And then what is the newest, most intriguing research that you've come across?
What's the new? You know what is the most interesting thing to me is I came across this study. I think it was published within the last 5 years, so it's not like brand new or anything. But it looked at how many fertilized eggs implant, like what proportion of fertilized eggs implant. And what it found was that if you have unprotected sex and there's, reasonably healthy sperm and an egg that's released, pretty much like in most cases, conception will occur. Conception's not a rare event. But it found that only 1/3, if I'm remembering correctly, 1/3 of conceptions are able to successfully implant in the uterus. And I found this so fascinating because we tend to think of conception as the beginning of pregnancy, and everyone's like, "Oh, conception has got to happen. It's got to happen." Like then, I hope that the sperm fertilizes my egg. But actually, this study makes it seem like no, that's actually kind of not exciting. Conception, just like it'll happen all the time, is fine. It's the implantation that's really the big hurdle that we should consider the beginning of pregnancy.
Oh, that's interesting. That is so interesting. That's true. Like people may not realize fertilization happened. It just didn't.
Right. And I think it's that only the fittest fertilized eggs are able to implant. And I think the message from this study shouldn't be, oh, what can we do to encourage implantation? I think once you have a fertilized egg that is, healthy and wants to implant, there are some things, but not much you can do to get in the way of that. It's more just taking the focus off of conception. And in general, I think, implantation is the most fascinating part of the whole conception journey. And there's also a lot of misunderstandings about it.
Absolutely. And so what you're saying is basically it really is the quality of both sperm and egg or embryo that will help
definitely
implant. So let's talk about timing, cycles. And I know there's a lot of myths and there's a lot of truths. So can you just give us like a general overview
definitely.
about cycle tracking?
So a few things. One is, I think, the biggest problem I see, the biggest thing that women do that hurt their chances is over-reliance on ovulation tests. I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding about how the LH surge works, and by extension, how ovulation tests work. So the LH surge occurs roughly. So it's when the LH surge begins that's important for when ovulation occurs. As soon as that LH surge starts, that starting event is what sends a message to the ovaries that they should, start thinking about releasing an egg. And so some women have LH surges that last 12 hours. Other ones, it could be a few days. It doesn't really matter how long the surge lasts. It matters when it began. And so that's misconception number one. I mean, I think what that leads to is, women might see, oh, I'm on my day 2 of getting a positive OPK, so I haven't ovulated yet. But no, you could very easily have ovulated already and still get positive OPKs.
Right.
The second thing, which I think is even a bigger problem, is that your most fertile days look like there's 2 or 3 really, really big good studies that look at, in this 6-day fertile window, which days are the best. And what they don't find exactly the same thing, but what they tend to all agree on is that ovulation day is not the best. It's actually ovulation day is a good day, but there's a much higher rate of very early miscarriage, chemical pregnancy. Often women who don't will conceive and then not even know that they miscarried. And so that kind of puts down the chances of ovulation day, but it's really the 3 days before ovulation that these studies agree are the best. And so if you're getting a positive OPK the day before ovulation and you're waiting for that positive to have sex, you're missing possibly 2 of your very best days. So, yeah.
Interesting. So you're saying by fertile window, we're talking about like the first sign of having like the creamy lotion type mucus for people who are looking and trying to chart their cycle, and because it is hard. I mean, the only time really, even with the temperature, is when it drops and then
the fertile window, as it's clinically defined, is the day of ovulation and the 5 days before. But of course, that's a retrospective definition. You never really know when the 5 days before ovulation are until you've already confirmed ovulation. And I think cervical mucus is an extremely good way to track the fertile window. But another misconception is, we think, we have this 6-day fertile window, but actually 6 days is the maximum fertile window. And how long your personal fertile window is really determined by the quality of your cervical mucus. And so, different cycles and different women and different ages throughout your life, your cervical mucus might be different. And that's, more fertile cervical mucus usually means a longer fertile window. It doesn't always mean the cervical mucus that you can easily observe doesn't always correlate to how much cervical mucus is there. Some women can just, see it on the toilet paper when they wipe, and other women need to, like I like to say, harvest it directly at the cervix. And I'm not aware of any data that says one or the others of those is better. If it's there at the cervix, it's there, and that's where it needs to be for the sperm. So I just don't want women to get like super alarmed if they're like, oh my God, I didn't see fertile cervical mucus. Like, does that mean I'm not fertile? It might be there and it might just be harder to see, but cervical mucus does influence how long your fertile window is. And it might be less than 6 days. It probably is less than 6 days, because that's like, for a 22-year-old who probably doesn't want to be pregnant anyway.
Right. So, it's really interesting because people do look at the peak mucus and think that's the only time, or I mean, we know, I guess, as professionals, that it really starts when you get that lotion mucus before leading up, because it protects the sperm. It's just really interesting that you say that on the peak, it's not necessarily the best.
Well, I think whenever you see the highly fertile cervical mucus is a really good time to have sex to get pregnant, but the day of ovulation itself has slightly lower chances than the few days before. One of the reasons for that is that sperm has to go through a process called capacitation. And long story short, it just means they kind of have to get ready to be capable of fertilizing an egg, and certain things have to happen to them while they're inside your reproductive tract. And if if you're having sex on the day of ovulation, there's not as much time for them to go through that capacitation process. The other interesting thing is that the reason why people are counseled to have sex multiple times in the fertile window it's not because multiple times increases your chances. When there's studies that look at, okay, this couple had sex every day of the fertile window and this couple just had sex 2 days before ovulation, having sex every day doesn't really increase your chances very much. It does a teeny tiny bit, not really significant. The reason why we tell people to have sex multiple times is because of that uncertainty, because we don't really know, when ovulation is going to occur until after it occurs, and then it's too late.
Right. So a lot of people track their cycle and they just track the dates. And I always say, of course, you got to do the basal body temperature. Can you talk about, what is important and what's not as important?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it depends on how you want to approach trying to get pregnant. I think some women find tracking temperature, cervical mucus, ovulation tests, all that stuff really empowering. And other women find it stressful. I think that the important thing about temperature, so there's two kinds of fertility signs. There's signs related to the hormone estradiol, which is just one version of estrogen, and your estrogen levels are high as you're approaching ovulation. Then there's signs related to progesterone, and your progesterone levels high when ovulation has occurred. And so if you're looking at signs related to estrogen, and these include your cervical mucus, cervical position, even I would put ovulation tests in this category, because LH can't be released unless estrogen levels are high. If you're looking at those kind of signs, those are really, really good for telling you you're probably fertile right now. But what they don't do is confirm that ovulation occurred. And so you're only ever fertile in retrospect. And if you see an estrogen sign, you're only potentially fertile. For that to be really fertile, you have to confirm that you actually did ovulate. And the only real way you can do that is by taking your temperature. Now, taking your temperature, I think, can be one of the most annoying and stressful of those signs. When I was trying to get pregnant, I took my temperature. When I was trying to get pregnant, I did like everything possible, because I wore the Ava bracelet, our product, and I just, because of the nature of my job, I wanted to try all the other things out there. So I was taking my temperature and just doing everything. But I remember, like, when you're in your 2-week wait and you're going to bed and you're taking your temperature in the morning, you're like, oh my God, I can't sleep because my temperature going to be low. Is it going to be high? What's it going to be doing? Not to mention, it's just like you have to clean your thermometer and remember to write it down. But the data that gives you is really, really valuable, because then you can isolate within, like a 2 or 3 day window or even less sometimes, when you likely ovulated. And that is very helpful for confirming that you had sex at the right time and knowing when to take a pregnancy test, which I think is the really big thing that, like, you're not going to get a pregnancy test before. Implantation happens around 8 to 10 days after ovulation in the vast majority of cases. And then it takes about a day for your HCG levels to build up enough to be even detectable on a pregnancy test. And so for me, that was the best thing about temperature tracking, is I knew exactly when the right day to take a pregnancy test was. And it was still significantly earlier than my period was due, but not so early that I knew the results would be wrong.
And it's also important to know that your temperature stays up. I mean, that's really important because it can tell you about your lining, progesterone.
Yeah.
Which is needed in order to carry a baby.
Yeah, definitely. And this is why I wish there was so much more research into progesterone, because I know there's a lot of women who have worries in very early pregnancy based on their temperature about what their progesterone levels are doing. Are their progesterone levels high enough to support a pregnancy? And they'll often go to their doctor and want to get on some kind of progesterone suppository to supplement their levels in early pregnancy. And the evidence for this is really mixed. There's not evidence that it hurts. The downside is very low, but there also isn't evidence that it helps. There is evidence that for women with recurrent miscarriages, it can help. Not as good evidence that women who don't have that history that it helps. But my hunch is that they would probably find something more if they did more research there. I obviously don't know that because that research hasn't been done. But yeah, I mean, progesterone is just a really all the focus goes on estrogen, but progesterone is such an important hormone, and there should be more research on it. Yeah,
it's just such a delicate balance of the two, but it's just it definitely is interesting because I feel like we're scratching the surface here with research.
Yeah, it's women's health definitely deserves a lot more attention.
So can you talk about the Ava bracelet?
Yeah, definitely. So the Ava bracelet started, let's see, it was, I think, almost 5 years ago now, that one of Ava's founders, Pascal, his wife, they already had 2 kids, and his wife was using the temperature method at the time to track her cycles to avoid getting pregnant. And he looked at this, and he knew a little bit about, or he knew a lot actually about sensor technology, and he thought, okay, if sensor technology has evolved so much in recent years and we can track, so many more things than we used to be able to, why is my wife manually taking her temperature with the thermometer at the same time every morning so painstakingly and annoyingly? Maybe there's other things that change in the menstrual cycle that we could measure and track it a lot more efficiently and easily. And so he, got together with the University Hospital of Zurich. We're based in Switzerland. They did a study where they basically said, okay, let's get a whole bunch of women and let's track every single thing that we can think of and just see if any of it changes in the menstrual cycle in a significant way. And that first study found a lot of promising things. Some of it there had been some small studies that before this that showed, for example, heart rate and breathing rate change in the menstrual cycle, but they were never done on someone continuously throughout the night wearing a device that was measuring it, constantly the whole time they were sleeping, when their parameters had reached their baseline levels and weren't impacted by their activity. It was like someone came into a lab twice during their follicular phase and twice during their luteal phase, and they said, oh, your heart rate's higher now. What does that mean? And so this was, as you can imagine, a lot more it was, I think, a big step forward in our knowledge in that area. And so their findings in this initial study, that's what kind of led to the creation of the Ava bracelet. So now, all these years later, Ava is a clinically tested device. It's worn only during sleep. It tracks 7 different physiological parameters, and it's able to detect the fertile window, 5 fertile days, 5 of the 6 fertile days in real time as they're happening. And so what's really, go ahead.
So what are the 7 different signals?
Let's see if I can name them all. I probably can. There's temperature, resting pulse rate, heart rate variability, which I can talk more about. That's a sign of physiological stress. There is perfusion. There's sleep, breathing rate, And let me see, which is the last one I'm forgetting. It might just be movement, the last one, which is a way of, which is how we estimate sleep. But yeah, I think that's all of them. Yeah, that's everything.
But that's interesting. So it's really accurate because it's checking
everything, and it's checking it continuously while you're sleeping. And so with temperature, when you're doing the traditional BBT method, you're just taking your temperature upon rising. But Ava's temperature reading is taken continuously throughout the night and is able to, your basal body temperature is the lowest temperature that your body reaches in a 24-hour period. And so you're not really getting your basal body temperature when you use the temperature method. You're just kind of approximating it by the temperature you get when you wake up. But it's probably around like 2 a.m. that your body actually reaches its lowest temperature. And I don't think most people want to wake up and actually take their temperature at that time. So it's nice to have a device that's just doing that for them. Not to mention that's reading these other signals that tell you the information about when you're getting close to ovulation.
Right. So what's the accuracy? Like, how accurate is it?
It is 89% accurate.
Okay. And this is based on the studies that they did in Zurich?
Yes.
Interesting. And so Ava World, as you mentioned, that's the editorial aspect of the company?
Yeah, that's really the place where we educate women about, everything about their fertility and their menstrual cycle. One thing I hear so much is that, I never knew anything about my cycle until I tried to get pregnant. And now I'm like, how did I not know this stuff before? It would have been useful in sex ed when I was a teenager and, throughout my 20s. And so it's really the goal of helping women have that information that they deserve to have about their bodies.
Definitely. It's really interesting.
Yeah. I think also there's, when I was trying to get pregnant and doing lots of research of all the questions that would come up, I couldn't believe how much so sometimes there's contradictory information on like things that you find in Google, and other times there's just the same not true statements repeated over and over again on lots of different websites, so that like you can't even ever track down the original source and people just start assuming it's true. And so I really wanted Ava World to be an antidote to that, where literally everything that we say and any claim, you can track down the study where it came from.
Right.
One thing, I was going to say, like, one example I like to talk about there is implantation bleeding. You hear in, trying to conceive circles, people talking about implantation bleeding a lot. And the idea is, if you see bleeding around the time that your period is due and you're trying to get pregnant, don't lose hope. Maybe it's not your period. Maybe it's just, bleeding that happened when the egg was trying to implant. So there's really no evidence at all that implantation causes bleeding. Bleeding can happen in very early pregnancy. Bleeding can happen or spotting can happen in a non-pregnant menstrual cycle. Bleeding is normal, but implantation does not cause it. However, there are so many websites, even very reputable ones, that talk about implantation bleeding as if it's a real thing, and none of them have a good source.
That's interesting. So you're saying based on the science, there's absolutely no science to prove
none. Yeah.
What other myths are there? I'd love to hear. This is great.
Let's see. This is a misconception that I hear a lot. So I think that a lot of women believe that using fertility-friendly lubricants will increase their chances for getting pregnant. I think there's a lot of anxiety around like, oh, what if my cervical mucus isn't as good? Then I'll just use, whatever fertility-friendly lube and that'll boost my chances. So it definitely does not work like that at all. Fertility-friendly lubricants are a good thing to use if you anyways already use lubricants during sex and you want to use one that doesn't hurt your chances. Then in that case, you should switch to a fertility-friendly one during your fertile window or when you're trying. But they absolutely don't do anything to boost your chances.
Oh, interesting. Well, I never thought that, but I could see how a lot of people talk about that. But this is definitely very interesting because I'm sure people have been on all kinds of forums and read all kinds of different myths. And you're right. I mean, some of them circulate everywhere. And then just because when you hear something repeatedly, you start to believe it.
Definitely. Another one, probably your listeners don't believe this, but I still see a lot of websites saying that the day after ovulation is fertile. It definitely is not. So, yeah, there's that one.
Okay, good. What else? This is good. I like these.
Let's see. Oh, I mean, this one, so I think, I don't know if this will be like quite as shocking, but I think people take pregnancy tests way too early sometimes. There's like literally like no chance of getting a positive pregnancy test before, I think the earliest I would believe is possible is like 7 days after ovulation, and that probably happens like 0.25% of the time. And for most people, it's more like 10 or 11 days is when you're going to first see a positive test. And I think anyone who claims they got a positive at 6 days after probably just got their ovulation date wrong.
Right. And that's hard to find, as we just talked about. I mean, I guess you can figure it out through temperature, but it's not something that you can easily know exact.
Yeah, and even temperature.
So it's important to wait.
Temperature is a great thing to do, and it can definitely, I think temperature confirms that ovulation almost certainly happened, and it narrows down when it happened to a probably, a 3-ish day window. But it's not always, you can't always tell, even from a chart that looks really obvious, that, ovulation occurred on, day 13 rather than day 12 or day 14. It's not going to, temperature's usually not good enough to say, oh, it was definitely this one day. It's more like in this 3-day window.
Yeah, definitely. So I had a patient who went to the ER for another reason, and she wanted to make sure, she was trying to get pregnant. So she wanted to make sure that she wasn't pregnant, and she was like a day or two before her 28 days. So she got a blood test, and the guy said, oh, you're definitely not pregnant because this is 99% accurate. And so about a week later, she came to me. She missed a couple appointments because of her condition that she went and got treated for, but luckily didn't take any medications. And she came to me, and I said, you know what, go get a pregnancy test. And she goes, no, the guy was definitely 100% sure. He said like 99% sure that it was accurate. And I said, go get a pregnancy test. Sure enough, she was pregnant.
Oh my God. See, that's an amazing story, but it also shows you that, OBs and, doctors, their expertise is usually, they're like the person you want to see if you have something wrong and you need help, but many of them don't understand the basics of the menstrual cycle. And they often don't believe women who their temperature data, and they're like, oh, that's not reliable.
Right.
Like, and that's just totally not true. And another thing that makes me think of is, and this is another myth that's related to doctors, but I think a lot of people believe that, your menstrual cycle is really only important if you're trying to get pregnant. And besides that, who cares? It doesn't matter. Even a lot of doctors believe this. But as I learned from my experience having hypothalamic amenorrhea, it's actually hugely important to your overall short-term and long-term health. If you're not ovulating and something in your lifestyle is causing you not to ovulate, that's not just an inconvenience, or some women might even see it as a convenience, but it's not something you only worry about when you want something from your body, when you want to get pregnant. It's something that impacts your bone health, your heart health, your long-term risk for dementia. So it's very important to get a regular menstrual cycle, and I think a lot of doctors don't realize that either.
So definitely interesting what you just mentioned, because have you read the book The Fifth Vital Sign?
No, but I'm really familiar with her work. So yeah.
Yeah, Lisa Hendrickson Jack. She's amazing, but she is definitely right on. I mean, it's a reflection really of a woman's health, because I would miss maybe 3 months in a row. And this is how I actually got interested in this, because when I was younger, the only option I got was to go on a birth control pill. There was never which is obviously a Band-Aid. It just masks the issue.
Right. I would say not even a Band-Aid, because it doesn't, Band-Aids at least help a wound heal without but going on the pill doesn't, it just covers it up with zero therapeutic properties.
Good point. Yeah. It's not even a Band-Aid. And that's basically the only options I had. And at the time, I didn't know anything about medicine or anything about health in general. And when I finally, years later, went to an acupuncturist, he said to me, he goes, with a very, very strong Chinese accent, a woman's menstrual cycle is very important. It's very important for women to have a healthy, regular menstrual cycle. And I remember at the time I was 25 years old, not really knowing or I guess appreciating that, but I knew what he was saying was really important. Meaning, like, I never realized just how important it was at that time for me to have a regular menstrual cycle, because I thought everything else is fine. I'm healthy. But I knew that what he was saying had a lot of value and a lot of power in it. And it kind of stuck with me, but I still didn't have, I guess, the life experience, or was I trying to get pregnant? No, So at the time it was kind of like, okay, I get it, but I don't totally get it.
Yeah.
And now looking back, I know that because of him, and he regulated my menstrual cycle, like because of him, I was able to get pregnant years later.
Oh, wow.
When I wanted to try, so this is one of the reasons I kind of feel like I retroactively got saved.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, and it's too bad that women aren't taught from a younger age how important their cycles are.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And the myth that we can get pregnant any day of our cycle, that's like the hugest myth. Everybody believes that because they go to health education and that's what they're told. Just any day is,
right. I don't think we have
day.
to lie to teenagers about their fertility to help them avoid getting pregnant.
Yeah. If anything, I mean, it can help them if they knew to avoid those days.
Yeah.
So it's definitely very interesting. I love these myths because, some of them are, like I said before, are repeated so many times that it can get confusing. One of the things that was really eye-opening to me was just that the day of ovulation, at that point, it's not necessarily the best day.
Right. And I wouldn't say you should avoid it. But
No, not avoid it. But I'm saying, like, some people think that that's the only day to focus on.
Right. I mean, it's really I think there's way too much focus on identifying ovulation at all in the whole world of trying to get pregnant. Really, what you should be looking for are signs of fertility. And, it's knowing when ovulation is kind of nice just to confirm it and just so you know when to take a pregnancy test, but it doesn't really help you get pregnant.
Right. It's something that a lot of people may not realize, and it's interesting to hear your perspective from a scientific and research background.
Well, thank you.
Because it confirms a lot. What else? Is there anything else?
I think, I don't know, the last thing is just cervical mucus is the coolest thing ever, and everyone should know how to track it if they are so inclined, because it's just there's been a lot of studies on how accurate is tracking is it for women who try to get pregnant looking only at their cervical mucus. They get their best days really, really accurately. So it seems like, it's not very scientific or precise, but actually it is. It's great.
Right. So don't underestimate the mucus.
Don't underestimate the mucus. Nobody should ever underestimate the mucus.
And what's interesting too is some people might think, my mucus is creamy, so it should be egg whites. They don't realize that there's many different types of mucus. Well, not many. There are many, but you only really see or perceive two types.
Right. I think if you're really obsessive about your mucus and you're checking it every day and looking at it, for several cycles, then you get to be more familiar with how the progression of mucus goes for you. But, it can take a while to develop that. Actually, another interesting thing about mucus that kind of helped me understand it better is, so the reason why cervical mucus is changing, first of all, so your increasing estrogen levels directly impact what's going on with your cervical mucus, which means that what you observe in your cervical mucus tells you what your estrogen levels are. Like, you're not going to have, egg white cervical mucus if your estrogen levels are low, like, because they have this, direct one-to-one relationship. And when your estrogen levels increase, what it does to your cervical mucus is it increases the water content. And so if you just think about that, for me at least, that helped me kind of know what I should be looking for, because everyone has kind of their own cervical mucus pattern. And for one person, their egg white, for them, it looks more watery and not as stretchy, and it can be different. But if you just think, oh, the water content of my cervical mucus is increasing as I get close to ovulation, that can help you make sense of it.
Right. So why it's stretchy, because there's more water content there.
Yeah, and it becomes more like water.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. It's also the pH levels of cervical mucus. So normally your vagina and your mucus is more acidic.
Right.
And sperm is...
Sperm killing machine, usually.
Sperm killing machine, yes. But in your fertile window, it becomes more base or less acidic. It's still acidic.
More alkaline.
Alkaline, yeah. And it's, I think when you're most fertile, it has the same pH level as sperm, which makes sense, or as semen. Sorry, not sperm, but it's just like, you should think of it as, it kind of becomes semen-like for a few days.
It's interesting. Well, in Chinese medicine, it's all about the yin and the yang. We could see it in everything. I mean, the yin is more cooling. It has more moisture. So, they kind of meld into each other. And yin is more like slow moving, whereas yang is active. It's like typical sperm,
Yeah.
and yin is typical egg, And so, but what's interesting is they both kind of have elements of each other.
Right.
And estrogen is considered more yin. It creates more of it's more cooling, because around the time of the follicular phase, we don't get as hot.
That's right.
And then estrogen is more yang. So it's interesting too, because they kind of meld into each other. If you look at the yin and yang symbol, so you have the follicular, which is lower, but then it dips down and then it spikes up. It's kind of like they meld into each other. It's almost like a wave when it goes back and then it goes forth.
Oh yeah, that's a great way to describe it.
It's like a heartbeat too,
Yeah, and it's actually a wave is interesting too, because it's called a follicular wave. The follicular wave, I think, is just the term for the recruitment of follicles in the ovaries, and them growing and one of them becoming dominant. And then women with super long cycles or PCOS can sometimes have multiple follicular waves before they successfully ovulate.
Right. And it's just it's amazing how nature is. I mean, it kind of picks the best, and sometimes it is, if something doesn't work out, it's for a reason, it really is for the best long term, but it's just definitely it's just amazing. The body is just so miraculous and so intelligent.
It really is.
Yeah. And so what Ava World, the information that you mostly focus on is really all about cycles.
It's about, myths about fertility and getting pregnant and cycles and all of that, and also pregnancy.
Okay, and so the Ava bracelet is also used in pregnancy?
Ava can be worn throughout the entire pregnancy and after, yes.
So I have a question. I'm curious about, does it have any radiation? Because I always...
No, it doesn't have any radiation.
Okay, thank you. That's good.
Yeah,
I'm glad I asked that, because, sometimes when you do have tracking devices, there is a Bluetooth or there's waves or...
Yeah, so it doesn't transmit any data while you're wearing it. It does use Bluetooth to sync, but if you're worried about radiation, you can just, you don't sync until the morning when you take it off, so you can always, leave the room when you sync. It's not...
I see.
Zero Bluetooth while you're wearing it during the night.
Okay, good to know. I mean, I think that a lot of people, especially when they're trying to get pregnant, they're trying to avoid any toxicity. They're trying to avoid any radiation. And a lot of people might, and a lot of these devices do have some...
Yeah, I mean, there's a device that you insert into your vagina and has Bluetooth in there to tell you what your cervical mucus quality is. I'm like, well, you could also just put a finger there.
Yes, exactly. So it's good to know. I think for the listeners, I think that's a make it or break it piece of information,
because people don't want to obviously increase any kind of radiation, or especially during pregnancy as well.
Right.
Right. So basically, for trying to get pregnant, it sounds like it gives you a lot more like important information. Like you really need to know this in order to get pregnant.
Yeah.
But for pregnancy, it's just more like, oh, I'm just curious to see how things are going and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's just kind of a nice to have to be able to have something that you used for trying to get pregnant that is not obsolete the second you get pregnant, and then you can use it afterwards too.
Right. Very interesting. So this has been a very fascinating and interesting conversation. I'm sure eye-opening for many people, because a lot of the listeners are on forums, group chats, discussing all kinds of different aspects of fertility and probably hearing a ton of myths. And, you just can't, you don't really, unless you know how to read research studies like you do, not a lot of people can separate truth from fiction, because sometimes when things get repeated over and over and over again, there's that saying, a lie that keeps getting repeated over and over again becomes truth.
Definitely.
I don't even know if I butchered that, but
I don't know, but that's like what propaganda is.
Yes, exactly. And it works, I'll tell you.
It really does.
So for the listeners who want to find you, how can people find you? How can people find Ava or in Ava World?
So avawomen.com. And then for Ava World, it's just avawomen.com/Ava World. And that's the best place. That's
awesome.
Where I spend all my time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was fascinating.
Thanks. I really loved this conversation with you.
So that concludes today's episode. You can find all the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to leave a review. Reviews are everything to podcasters. You can find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com. And please be on the lookout for my online course and program. This course has emerged from everything that I've been using for the fertility program I now offer at my office. I wanted to consolidate all of my suggestions and coaching and put it into a form that anyone can purchase and use. It was important for me to encompass key fertility health factors, as well as guide you in implementing changes in your routine that are shown to boost fertility while being realistic and user-friendly. I will be offering this course with and without coaching. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com, where you can find the subscription form. I thank you so much for listening in and hope you have a beautiful day.